Hi, and welcome to the Lean Day of Training. This Lean module, or Lean Day, is one of the 3 days that makes up the Yellow Belt program. Because of the complexity and the length of the program, we're going to divide this Lean Day into 4 different videos. Again, these are PowerPoint slides that can be stopped, started, restarted, fast forwarded. You can mute this sound if you don't want to listen to my voice. That's fine too. What we're trying to do is convey to you as much information as possible, not just through slides, but also through some audio. Hope you enjoy this, and good luck. This will become a common slide, as it will be part of each of the 3 days of the Yellow Belt training. This shows the relationship between Six Sigma, process control, and Lean. This module is on Lean. We'll be reviewing several things noted here and a few additional tools. Lean is about creating common language and reducing communication issues between departments and organizations. I've seen this even between divisions. So there's opportunities at a lot of different levels, certainly even within a department. What I've seen traveling to different facilities and different organizations, whether it's healthcare, manufacturing, or other business environments, what I've seen is that many different departments control information, data, and even procedures much differently. So what we wind up doing is putting data in many different locations. Anytime it's in more than one location, you've got an opportunity for error. Lean is about identifying those overproducing opportunities or overproducing instances and looking for ways to enhance them, reduce those redundant operations. We want everyone to use the same information, the same systems as practical as possible. This is our House of Lean. We're going to cover every one of these topics. We're not going to go into a tremendous amount of detail on each one, but we're going to give you a basic understanding of each one of these topics. So I think you're going to get a good feel for what these tools are and how to actually apply them within your work environment. So here's our downtime acronym. If there was one slide that I would want you to remember, if there's one item that I'd want you to remember throughout this Lean Day or as a result of this Lean Day training, this would be it. If you can, at the end of the day, close your eyes and identify the 8 different types of waste and inefficiencies that exist in all environments, then we've done our job. And when we talk about Lean 2020, we're talking about providing you folks with Lean 2020 vision. And again, that vision to be able to identify these 8 different types of waste and inefficiencies in every single environment. And I don't care, again, what environment I've been to, what organization I've been to, these different wastes and inefficiencies exist everywhere. As sad as that sounds, to some extent, greater in some, lesser in others. So with that being said, I will also tell you that there is a separate video that we've provided out on YouTube and on our website relative to the waste walk. There's a healthcare one and a business manufacturing one. I'm going to briefly review them now, but I'd also encourage you to go and review those videos. Again, using healthcare and business examples are going to help you draw parallels for your work environment. So relative to defects or slips within a work environment, these are errors. Not all the time will it create a scrap opportunity. Most of the defects that we've run across are things that we're able to either rework or repair. If you're working on a document, you may have some spelling mistakes, grammar mistakes. You're going to have to go back over and fix those. So defects are not always scrap, but sometimes they're, we'll call reworkable. Either way, they're not something that we want. They waste time to have to fix, and they're costly. They're costly relative to time. So defects are one of the worst things that we can have in our environment, very costly. And if you look across your environment, I'm certain that you're going to be able to identify opportunities. Overproducing is when we enter data into multiple locations. Overproducing also is when we're producing more product than we necessarily need. When we're in a manufacturing environment, we may start 110 pieces to yield 100 pieces to ship out to a customer. We don't want to start 100 pieces and wind up with 95 pieces at the end of the line. So generally, manufacturing folks, they start more than what they need. Any of those extra pieces require extra manufacturing time, whether it's labor, time on a machine, extra setups, lots of waste associated with that. So if we can reduce our overproducing, we're going to save the organization a lot of money. Additionally, overproducing can be in the transactional world, in the office environment, can be related to where we're putting information and data in multiple locations. Next is waiting or halting. We have product that sits prior to a process. No one works on more than one report at a time, so you've got stacks of reports that may be waiting for you, stacks of requisitions. If you go into a healthcare environment, you have what we call waiting rooms. So patients are not seen right away, they go and they sit in a waiting room. So waiting, we wait for meetings, we wait for machine times, we wait for perhaps a down machine, we're waiting for maintenance to be done or repair to be done. Constantly seeing product sitting and waiting around an environment. So when you think about waiting, look out into your environment and look for reports, look for documentation, look for items that are not moving. We're going to talk about non-value added processes in the next slide, so I'd like to jump ahead and talk about transportation. When we talk about transportation, this is slightly different than motion. Transportation is the product or thing moving through your process. So consider this the product you're manufacturing. Think about this as your report. Think about this as patients moving through your facilities. When we move product, patients, or reports, paperwork through our facilities, the departments and the locations that we move these items to are not necessarily right next to each other. In some cases, they're several floors away or several hundred feet away from each other. I've run into organizations where their buildings are not just next door to each other, but they may be next door, but across a street. They may be several miles down the road, or sometimes we have to send product out to a subcontractor for outside servicing. So there's lots of different things that cause us to have increased transportation. So when we're looking at waste, we want to look at these opportunities and think about the ways that we can reduce transportation within our organization. Often it's redesigning our facilities. And again, these are some of the lean tools that we'll talk about later on in the module. Inventory. We have three different types of inventory. Let's call it raw material, the beginning of our process. We have work in process. This is stuff that's been released to the floor, manufacturing, office environments, whatever. And then later on we have the inventory of our finished goods. So three levels of inventory, or three areas of inventory. Too much inventory, it's going to be very costly, and to carry this inventory, it's going to cause delays. If you don't have enough inventory, just the opposite. We're going to actually starve our manufacturing floor. If I'm going into my inventory area of my raw materials and I don't have enough product to release to my floor, then maybe my floor needs to shut down for a little while, or it's not going to run as smoothly as possible. So we want to reduce the inventory to a level that's manageable, and then at the same time we also want to reduce it to a level where it's not going to starve a department. So even work in process, as we're moving through, too much inventory is going to create bottleneck areas. And when I walk through a facility, if I see large stacks of product, I don't care what you're manufacturing, if I'm seeing a lot of product, it's basically telling me that you have a capability problem. And that capability problem may be a quality problem or a capacity problem where you may not have enough throughput capacity. So either way, regardless again of what you're manufacturing, what you're moving through your facility, even if it's patients, if I see a lot of patients held up at x-ray, well, I can tell you that you either got to find a way to improve the efficiency in that area, or maybe you're finding out that every other x-ray is having problems and you're going to have to reshoot x-rays. So I need to solve that quality problem. Again, manufacturing, very similar. You've either got a capacity or a quality problem that's causing that excess inventory. Raw material, we kind of talked about briefly. Too much raw material, and that's costly to carry on the books. Not enough, and we're not going to be able to release the right amount of product to the floor. Finished goods, costly if we can't sell it. If a customer comes back to us and says they want to spin the revision from, say, a Rev A to a Rev B, and we're not able to modify that revision A and we've got to start all over, then we've just wasted a lot of time and effort in our manufacturing. We've wasted a lot of materials as well. We've got to throw those finished goods out. So keeping too much finished goods without customer approval and knowledge can be very costly. Next is motion. Motion is similar to transportation, but as we mentioned with transportation, which is the product, patient, or thing going through your process, motion is the actual person or the operator, technician, their movements throughout the operation. So this is when we see people running to the copiers or going to file something or looking for a blueprint or tool, something within their process. How do we reduce the amount of motion within a department? We reduce motion by employing tools like 5S, which is a workplace organization and cleanliness tool, having things readily available within arm's reach of an individual, and we'll cover 5S in the next few slides. Lastly, we're going to talk about lack of employee engagement. One of the saddest things I heard one time is a supervisor speaking to an employee, and that individual said, "I don't care about your input, I care about your output." That's not really the way I'd like to engage my employees, and it's certainly not going to convey a lot of teamwork in an environment such as that. When we're trying to improve a process, trying to enhance a process, the employees working in that environment, those individuals that are working 8, 9, 10 hours a day in that environment, they've got a lot of good ideas, a lot of neat ideas. We need to tap into that. So having a environment that provides opportunities for those individuals to share their input, share their thoughts and ideas is something that we want to encourage. So this is a little unconventional relative to the other types of waste and inefficiencies, but think about the employees, the technicians, associates, whatever your organization calls them. If we're not tapping into that resource, then it's a waste. So keep an open door policy and an open door that people want to walk through, and sometimes don't be afraid to go out to the floor and actually solicit those ideas. Lastly, relative to employee engagement, I've facilitated a lot of Kaizen activities, a lot of project work, and having a diverse team, I'll talk about this a little bit later on too, is part of our Six Sigma Day, but having a diverse team of individuals to work on a project is extremely important. So when you're putting together a team, all levels within an organization, if I can grab a supervisor, an engineer, certainly want some line people, I want to consider people on off shifts and things like that. This is a terrific opportunity for us to engage employees. So please don't underestimate the information and the value of the people on your floor. So I mentioned that we were going to talk about processes that were non-value added. This is that N in the downtime. So there's three things that make a process value added. First, the activity needs to transform or shape the product or thing going through the process. So if it's a process that's adding a part to a board or drilling a hole in a board, or perhaps we're giving physical therapy or we're injecting some sort of medication into the individual, we're actually changing the product or the thing going through our process. In the transactional world, the office environment, if we're actually documenting something on a report or entering something into a computer, we're changing that. So that is a value-added operation. It's only value-added if we do it right the first time. So again, the second caveat to this, and we need to pass all three of these to make a process value-added, we need to do it right the first time. Lastly, it needs to be valued by the external customer. Is that customer willing to pay for that activity? So we might be doing some things to the product and changing the product, but if the customer isn't willing to pay for that, then it's non-value added. An example might be that in addition to all the markings on our product, we add our logo to that. Well, we're changing that product, but the customer doesn't care whether our logo appears on that product. So in that particular case, that would be a non-value added activity. So again, adding our logo, we could do it right the first time. It's definitely changing the product, but the customer doesn't value that. It's not willing to pay for that. So that's non-value added. What this little picture is trying to show here, that if you were to look at all of the value added time versus the non-value added time in your process, and again, I don't care what process it is, you're going to find out that most of the time, in this 95% is pretty spot on in most environments. 95% plus or minus a few percent of your process will be non-value added time. I've seen it as high as 99%, sad as that sounds. So don't be too concerned if you get something close to this. That 95% is where we're going to want to focus our attention. I'll give you a quick example. One of my first assignments when I was working on a lean and throughput issue was to help move more product through this particular department. So what I did was I started looking at the machine time and our throughput through these machines and wondering how much faster I could get these machines to operate. What I was really working on was that 5% or that non-value added portion of that process. I was not looking at why the machines were down, what my operators were doing while the machines were down, and some of those activities that could have been say done parallel to the machine being up. So instead of focusing on the red area and the 95%, which is, if you looked at this from a Pareto principle, why would you work on something that's causing you 5% of the pain? You want to work on the things that are 95%. So relative to time saving, if I was going to save any time, I'm going to save a larger portion of time if I'm working on the 95% relative to the 5%. So here's a little quiz that I'd like to take with you relative to value added or non-value added. So what I'm going to do is go through these, and I want you to tell me whether the assembly process is value added or non-value added. And we're going to say it's value added. We're changing the product if we do it right the first time, and the customer obviously cares about it because they're telling us that they want the product assembled. Quality inspection, non-value added. Granted, the customer may require, in many cases, us to inspect the product, and if we do it right the first time, that makes sense, but we're not changing the product or thing going through the process. So a quality inspection, any type of inspection, is non-value added. Now, it may be business value added, especially if we're finding a lot of defects and we don't have a good controlled process. Certainly something that I'm not going to bypass, but it doesn't change the fact that it's non-value added. Again, maybe business value added, and I'm certainly not going to remove it right away, but I am going to think about removing it hopefully later on as my process improves. Sealing product. Applying any type of sealant or whatever, assuming that the customer has made this a requirement, if we do it right the first time, is absolutely value added. Again, changing the product, doing it right the first time, and the customer cares. Processing an invoice. Well, I'm not sure too many places that like to be invoiced, so I'm going to say it's probably not value added. But from a paperwork standpoint, processing an invoice, you're changing the invoice if you do it right the first time, and certainly the customer, if we said that this was our internal customer, our accounting department would certainly like to see invoices being processed. So this would be value added / business value added. Hand soldering. Certainly love to do things automatically if possible through like a wave soldering process, but hand soldering operation is still going to be considered value added. Hand soldering changes the product if we do it right the first time, and certainly the customer's caring that we're soldering the product components onto a product. Material handling, moving product through a facility. Well, we're changing the location, but we're really not changing the product, even though we may do it right the first time. And then we can also say that the customer doesn't really care about this. So we're going to say this is non-value added. Customers don't care that we move product through our facilities, even though we may have to from one location to another. And again, non-value added from the standpoint of we're not changing the product itself. Billing a customer, very similar. This is business value added. Customers, again, don't want to be billed, but we're going to do it anyway. So billing a customer is non-value added, but certainly business value added, even though we may do it right the first time. And sending a bill, creating that bill is actually changing that item. Packaging. We're going to consider this value added. We're changing the product by putting it into a package. If we do it right the first time, certainly the customers want things packaged up. Lots of times we're adding things like desiccants or indicators, maybe they're vacuum sealed. There's specific requirements that are part of this packaging requirement. So customers are not only paying for their product, but they're paying for packaging, and we're shipping that out to them. So we're going to consider this value added. Stores or inventory areas. Anytime we're handling inventory, this is all non-value added. It doesn't change the product. We're just storing it away. Customer complaint response. Again, non-value added. It doesn't touch any product. Customers certainly want their responses, their complaints responded to, but in this particular case, it doesn't change the product. It has no real value. Does it have business value? Absolutely, and we're going to address customers and their complaints. What's really interesting here, in this little window opened up here, the thought here is we've got a lot of value-added times and we've got some non-value-added processes that are happening here. But my question to you is, all of the time here value-added? And I'm going to pick on the first one here, which is the assembly process. When you're assembling product, you may have 20 pieces that require assembling. Similar to processing an invoice, you may have 20 invoices that you may need to process. But what you're not doing is you're probably not working on all 20 at the same time. Your machine may only be able to do 1 or maybe 5 at a time. Certainly if you're processing an invoice, if you've got one person in your department, they're not working on 20, they're working on 1. So while they're working on 1, the other 19 are sitting. And that's a big part of that 95 and 5% graph that I showed you on the previous slide. So when I talk about items sitting most of the time, it's because of that. The waiting is just such a huge portion of this. When that person that's working on those invoices or that assembly process, when they go home at night, is there someone that's working on that? Well, sometimes in manufacturing, we don't have second and third shifts. Over the weekends, we don't have people that are working on this product. So the product is sitting. So if you start adding up all those sitting times, all those times that they're waiting, it's really easy to see that even in the value-added operations things are sitting, non-value-added time easily jumps into the high 90 percent area. So why lean? Years ago, we've all heard the stories about the $500 hammers or the aspirins that cost $50 or whatever. Those days are over. We've got to look at reducing our costs associated with manufacturing and processing folks through our facilities. So the profit that we see today is what we're able to obtain for our services minus the cost of operations. So lean is going to help us reduce those costs, and therefore our profits will go up as we reduce those costs. We talked a bit about value added and non-value added, and this slide is just going to help us identify that although we have this distinction between value added and non-value added, we do have this middle portion here, which I'm going to consider non-value added but a required waste. An example might be waste treatment, and we're certainly not changing our product if we're waste treating our water or we're performing different tests to ensure that our waste is being handled properly. Customers don't necessarily care about that. They want their product, they want it on time, and they want it of good quality. But we need to stay in business. So we're going to do things that are business value added that may not be customer value added in the pure sense of the term here. So not telling you to eliminate any of those business needs, but what I'm going to tell you is that there is opportunities to save money, save time in all three of these categories. So you can reduce and eliminate time and waste associated with each one of these activities. What I can tell you is that the bottom activity is the purest waste, and that's the one activity before I go off and spend a lot of time enhancing or reducing waste associated with those steps. The first thing I'm going to do is find out if there's a way that I can eliminate that. And if I can eliminate that step, then any of the time that I've wasted or invested simplifying that step, I will have saved. So all three of these levels of activities, you can certainly reduce the time and waste associated with them. There's only one activity, and that's the bottom one, that you can actually eliminate. So first look to eliminate the non-value added activities. If you can't, then look to improve them.